Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Connection, a dual podcast where I share gaming news and esports news from Korea for all the fans out there in the West, and then global gaming news and esports news for the Korean fans as well in a separate episode. This is technically episode 4. We did skip last week as I had to take care of a couple things, but we're back, albeit not at the usual time because I've still got a couple things I'm dealing with, mostly impacted due to all the changes coming from the coronavirus, but we can talk about that a little bit later. Just as a heads up with all that's going on, today is going to be a little less structured, but there's still plenty to dive into because we've had quite a few big news items just in general in gaming and esports, mostly just gaming more so, primarily talking about obviously Project A, now known as Valorant from Riot Games, and we'll talk about how Korea's reaction has been so far. But before we go into that, as we always do, we'll take a quick look at the PC Cafe rankings. In the past week, really nothing's changed, and rightfully so, because nothing new has happened, except for somehow Sudden Attack coming back up. But I think more so than Sudden Attack coming up, maybe it was Overwatch going down. But anyway, Sudden Attack overcame Overwatch, which it hasn't for a little bit, but it came back up in the rankings. There are some kind of, I guess, speculations in jest about maybe it's because kids, younger kids can't go to the PC cafes anymore because of the coronavirus, or, not as many are going, which, maybe that has to do with it. Quite frankly, more than anything, I think it just speaks to the fact that Sun Attack is just still being played a lot in Korea, which is kind of crazy to think about. For anyone not aware, Sun Attack 2 was a game that existed at some point. But then they just continued it because it was just like a political mess. And then people just weren't transferring over as much. So then it just went back to Sudden Attack, which is a very, very old game. Looks old, feels old, but that is still, in terms of straight, I guess, quote unquote, more traditional FPSs, right? So not Battle Royale, not like skills and heroes and operators, etc. That's the one that's played the most in Korea for all these years. There were a couple here and there, right? Crossfire had a little blip in the middle. There were a couple other options, but Sudden Attack was the one that people stuck with through and through. And there's been a lot of thought and research done on that, whether it's at a professional level or even just kind of speculation level. And a lot of people think it's just the familiarity, and then they do so many different event-based mechanics, right? And some people will complain about the new skins. Like, they do a bunch of skins based on celebrities. This is actually something a little fun to talk about. It's kind of weird, personally. I find it a little bit weird. But it's like it's this, it's a tactical FPS. It's the quote unquote CS:GO clone of Korea, or CS clone. But it's weird because they'll do these events where, let's say a new K-pop group comes out, right? Girl or guy, doesn't matter. They've done both. And then they now contract them as like their new, marketing celebrities, which is fine. Everyone does that, shoot commercials, etc. But then like they'll make a skin on those celebrities. So now you're playing as that celebrity. I don't know who your favorite K-pop idols might be, but yeah, so they do that, and so you see these like celebrity models running around in game with guns. It's kind of weird. It's kind of uncanny, and there's been some controversy around that, even from the get go, but it clearly has enough of an audience where it's making them money, and also it's just something. At least it's something, right? It's content. So that's been something they've always kept up with a lot. Sudden Attack also did release last year their own battle royale mode, which seemed okay. It seemed like a much more confined arena battle royale mode, like much quicker, right? Not too focused on the whole run around a big map portion. It's much smaller maps. Still picking up items and such. I didn't play it. I've just watched a little bit of it and then watched the trailer for it. I think they just hopped on to the bandwagon, and that was enough for the fans who have been playing that game. And so it's still alive and kicking. We'll come back to Sudden Attack actually later because there is something to talk about in relation to Valorant. But that's about it on the PC Cafe rankings. Otherwise, League of Legends at the top. PUBG's still going strong. That's really about it. Nothing really changed. I'm pretty sure that was actually the only notable shift in rankings this past week. Aside from that, before we dive into the big news items, including coronavirus and Valorant, just a couple things I wanted to point out is so a new game called Skull. It's a roguelite, right? That's what we're calling them now. Yeah. I think it's released in open access. I don't think it's full released. But it is actually from NeoWiz, which is a Korean game company. But it's one of those. It's published from NeoWiz, but it's one of those games in a long time from Korea that just seems very polished. I haven't played it yet, but I've watched a lot of it, and it seems like it's got the right elements for people who like that genre, and it looks very fun. And the reception so far, even in Korea, was like, I'm actually surprised this is a game coming out of Korea, which is a good thing. It's a good thing because, again, given the history of gaming in Korea, Korea hasn't necessarily really been at the top for game development for multiple different reasons, right? But it's never really been the pinnacle. There have been hits here and there, but nothing consistent enough where people, globally are looking at companies like, NCSoft or Nexon. Certain like MMO fans will know those names, but that's about it. So very impressive if you are interested in those pixel-based indie games and roguelites. I would definitely check it out. At least the gameplay, it definitely looked a lot of fun. Looked like a lot of fun. The premise is, you're a skeleton, and then you change your skull basically, so your hats, and that's how you get different skills, and then you go from there. But yeah, it looks good. I do plan to try it at some point. It's just not really high on the priority list right now since we have a lot of big games coming up going into spring. And then, as we start talking about the coronavirus, I mean, that's impacted obviously Korea as a whole quite a bit. Korea being the country with the second most outbreaks, or confirmed outbreaks, I should say, because that's obviously part of the equation with the quick rise of confirmed cases early on. Obviously, tests were done more aggressively and more openly in Korea. I don't know if some of you guys have seen some of the news items around that, but there's like drive-through tests you can get that are a little bit quicker and more available, and then there are obviously separate clinics set up specifically for tests. I get text messages like every other day about which clinics are open if you have any symptoms and which hotlines to call before you go and how to set up an appointment and all that. So it's been very, very active. But alas, obviously, Korea in general is a very densely populated country, at least, the main cities. And then, the outbreak was happening in certain areas as well. Not so much in Seoul yet, but, it's slowly more cases are being confirmed. There were a couple areas even in like Gangnam, which is the best way to put it is like the Times Square of Seoul. There were like certain areas being closed off because of sudden confirmed cases and things like that. And then now it's expanding to the point where if you now have confirmation that you've been in contact or in the same room with someone who now has a confirmed case, right, you're advised to go into self-quarantine and things like that. So it's getting up there. It's kind of weird. I've never been present in an area that is impacted by, I guess, not necessarily even just like illnesses, but something at a global scale, right? So like I've been, I was in New York when there were bad storms and like our window flew off once and we had to get it repaired, and the whole porch was like flooded and whatnot. but and I've like driven through blizzards, but that's like a very contained case, right? It's like, all right. Also New York's just weird. If you're from New York or you have friends from New York, you'll know. Right. Every time there's like a hurricane warning or not in New York, like a lot of the city is like told to evacuate even, and then half of them like don't take it seriously. But anyway, so it's just weird to see that happen. I honestly, the last time I've seen something happen, not even at a global, I guess like more of a national I don't want to say crisis situation because I don't think it's quite like a at a crisis level yet. It's obviously more precautionary because there isn't a vaccine yet, but um, and because it impacts certain groups obviously more than others. But the last one I can kind of remember would be when I was a kid in Korea, and Korea went through its financial crisis, and that's when like banks were just like shunned down left and right, and people were, and that was another time where people were like buying out ramen and rice and water because you like see just like banks shutting down and people just losing all their savings and everyone's just like no one knows what tomorrow's going to look like, so then people just start buying out all these emergency rations, I guess. So that was like the only time, but I was too young to really be impacted too much, other than we also like bought a lot of that stuff, like dried food and stuff, and it was like piled up in our pantry. I was like, oh yeah, this is crazy. But I was a kid. So now like my own rice being delivered very, very late and things like that. It's like a weird, I don't know. For me, it's kind of weird. Not in a bad way, just because I'm not familiar to it. I get it though. Again, for people who think it's like, for people who keep saying it's fear mongering or whatever, I think for the countries that are impacted a lot more, it's not because everyone thinks they're gonna like die. Like that's not the thing. But complications just come if you're faced with this kind of situation, right? Even if, for instance, in Korea, right, even if you don't have the virus, if things are being held up and places are closing for an indefinite amount of time or being postponed, people just kind of want to be prepared. Granted, sometimes Koreans maybe go a little too far in the whole preparation phase for certain things, but better safe than sorry, right? So I don't think when people are like, oh yeah, people are just like buying out water, I don't think it's necessarily that it's fear mongering at a national scale. It's just like because if everyone's trying to buy it, like it's gonna run out. So people are just trying to get ahead of the curve a little bit, just in case there's a delay and whatnot. So just something to consider. Obviously, some areas and some people are reacting more so in just kind of blind panic, and I agree that's the reasoning for that is not good. I don't necessarily think the action is condemnable, but I don't think the reasoning is, it is better to be better educated. But just something to keep in mind. But as we were talking about the coronavirus, obviously gaming companies have been having people work from home kind of indefinitely. I think the general consensus is most big companies, at least within the IT and gaming sphere, I know for sure, are having people in Korea work from home until this week and then seeing where it goes, because a lot of projections seem to say that this week is supposed to be kind of the peak, and then we should start seeing some improvements, whether it's containment, whether it's some leads on vaccines, etc. So a lot of the big companies seem to have everything extended for this week. Obviously, events is a whole different thing. We can talk about that a little bit. But before we go there, just as a note, right? So I have people working at the various esports ventures, and we're seeing all these news articles pop up for all the big game companies like Nexon and a few others, just kind of sending everyone home, and everyone's working from home. So you see if you go into Korean Twitch streams during the day, you just see a lot more people being like active in chat because they're like, oh yeah, I'm just working from home now. So hopefully it doesn't go for too long, because obviously certain things just aren't as effectively done when everyone's working from home, right? I'm not like against working from home as a concept, but certain things you just like need, whether it's technology gear or people in one room. So hopefully it's not delayed too much, but also, you know what, if this is the situation we have, the silver lining is hopefully people find a little bit more perspective, right, on what they're able to do, maybe rediscover some hobbies, right, just kind of be able to take a step back. So that's the hopeful silver lining. Other things that are delayed or postponed, obviously one of the biggest ones was LCK announced that they will be indefinitely going on hiatus after this week's matches. I am actually a little surprised that it came this late, because a number of other leagues started, they were trying to do like online, no audience, and then they were just like, all right, we're just we're just like not doing it. We're holding off. Cartwriter League was one where they started with no audience, and then they were just like, all right, we're just holding off on the whole thing until we know what's going on with the coronavirus. So LCK, it is a shame. Also, just because obviously it had been going on, and then now it's not. So I know a lot of the fans are a little miffed, but again, better safe than sorry. Obviously, with something like League of Legends being a global league, it is going to impact quite a few things. If, for instance, no easy solution seems viable in the near future, there's going to be a lot more things to consider from Riot's end, but I'm sure there's a number of different like emergency teams trying to sort that out right now. So as people who are just enjoying the content or working on it indirectly, the best we can do is wait, right, and be hopeful, support it in ways we can, right? It was the same thing with IEM when they had to not allow the public to enjoy the event like the day before it was going to be open to the public. Like it sucks, but the most you can do is support it in ways you can, whether that means tuning into streams if they are going on, whether it means consuming content around it for the people who are creating it, or just continuing discussions about it on your various social media platforms. I think that's the best you can do. And then obviously if you have the resources or means to take part in supporting, finding a quicker solution for the virus just globally, great, do it. But if you don't, when it comes to the content you enjoy, don't just be like, oh, this sucks. Just, support it in other ways that you can while we wait. And then it'll continue. It'll continue at some point, right? At the end of the day, there is a certain amount of time that's needed for something like this to sort itself out. So the best we can do is wait. But yeah, I was a little surprised, but at the end of the day, unfortunate to hear LCK is going to be indefinitely delayed. Because I think I can only imagine the thought process for LCK is, they already started it, so they finished the first wave, first heat. So let's just take that break and hopefully something comes up, right, as a solution within, let's say like 2 weeks or so. Because if not, they might have to resort to what the LPL is doing, of doing like online matches and things like that, which come with a number of other problems, including, obviously like the LPL is trying to sort that out themselves, but whether it's like refs going to team houses and whether that's going to be a matter of quarantine and things like that. I mean, there's a number of things to consider, and I think LCK is just hoping that it doesn't get to that point, and they're trying to hold off as long as possible before choosing the worst case scenario. I'm sure if they have to, they'll do it, but I would hope for their sake, the player's sake, and everyone else's sake, even if it just means going back to the studio without a public audience, I think that would still be preferred on multiple fronts. So I wish them the best on that venture, and hopefully we can get there. Now, with all that said, there's a number of other smaller news items, but really the big one was Valorant being, I guess, officially announced, right? Not leaked, just confirmed. The names confirmed. Obviously, they released official pre-alpha footage from their internal playtest, and then it looks like a lot of the embargoes on journalists were lifted, so they could share their experiences with the game so far, what they've learned, or their interviews with the dev team at Riot. Now, there's been a lot of speculation, including on my end, about, well, what is this going to do for Asia? And I will admit, even my first impression was I think it has a good shot. And to be fair, I think it still does. I think the potential for it to do well as an FPS in Korea. I won't speak on China when it comes to this, right? Or other regions of Asia, because I haven't played games in other regions. If it's an established game and like an esports scene, I can talk about that a little bit. But I never lived in China playing games there and enjoying games with other Chinese friends and things like that. So I won't speak to that matter. I'll strictly speak about Korea. But so I still stand by that. I think the potential is there. And a lot of that came from the aesthetic direction, not necessarily the quality, right, of the art, graphics, textures, etc. now it appears when I was scouring through a lot of reactions from Korea, and again, these are small sample sizes, and no, not nearly enough people from Korea have actually even tried it, even at a special invite level. So take this with a grain of salt, but it appears that I've also, how to say this, miscalculated how used to, I guess, like grander graphics Korean gamers have become. And it's weird to think about because we just talked about how people are still playing Sun and Attack, which is a very old game that just looks old, right? To be very honest, for people who just play new games that come out, Sun and Attack is gonna look like butt. It just looks bad, but people are still playing it, right? Because that's the game they invested into. That's the game they spent money on. That's the game they grew up playing. And so people are still playing it. With that said, it appears that I guess the newer generation, I can only wager, the newer generation of gamers who have been enjoying things like Overwatch and PUBG, even the small community that's still playing Apex Legends in Korea. Now they're all used to this higher standard of I don't want to just say graphics, but aesthetic, right? And that includes not just like graphics quality from a technical level, but the aesthetic, the feel, right? The movement, the textures, the particle effects, all of that. Now, a lot comes with that, right? So, for instance, Apex Legends is a great example as a game where it's not just that the graphics themselves are like the best graphics I've ever seen in a video game, but it's that it flows really well, right? The game's smooth, it's fast, and on top of that, now the graphics work so well at that pace, so it really feels like I'm in this, sci-fi fantasy world, like fighting for my life in this arena. It does that so well. It's just a good package of a presentation when it comes to aesthetics, right? Or aesthetic. And then, to be honest, I'm not really sure where the arguments are coming from in Korea that PUBG has like great graphics. I guess for a battle royale that is going for that. Again, I don't mean actual realism, but realistic look and feel, right? Basically modern day look and feel. I guess so. I never looked at PUBG as like a great game for graphics personally. I'm not saying it's bad. I didn't mind it at all. I think for the for what it is, it's totally fine where it is. But I wouldn't look at that and be like, that's the crisis of this generation. Not that anyone's saying that, but as an exaggeration. Overwatch obviously is another example similar to Apex Legends, where again, it's a fantasy world, etc. But it's clean, right? It's crisp, it's bright, it pops. Sometimes maybe too much when it comes to the effects, but it has that polished feel. And I think a lot of people were disappointed in Korea with the initial presentation from the pre-alpha footage because the game looks, for lack of a better term, old. Now, I kept watching that footage, and I want to say a lot of that comes from how it plays, or what it looks like it plays, again, since I'm not the one playing it, rather than the actual graphics itself. The graphics are very simple, but I don't think it's so simple that it looks old, right? If I look at the screenshots, I'm not looking at it being like, oh, like who's making, like this game looks so old. How is anyone publishing this in today's age? Like I don't look at the screenshots and think that. I do think they could some of them could use a little bit more polish on the textures, etc. Not that I'm a expert on what needs improvement, but I think if the screenshot that we have now, if the screenshots we have today are, let's say, like medium settings when the game comes out, I think I would personally be fine with it. I don't think it would be a game that I would talk about the graphics for, but then again, personally, I'm also just not a guy who looks for really great graphics in my video games, except for maybe certain single-player games. So, and given just the number of old online games Koreans play, I thought as long as the direction, which I still think the overall tone and direction is is more in favor of Korea than other FPSs we've had. I think I underestimated how much people now care about the actual polish and quality. And then I also saw some interesting remarks on Korean forums talking about how they thought the art direction or graphical direction was more geared towards China than Korea, which is funny because I also read people saying that the Chinese community did not respond well to the initial footage. But when I'm looking at it, I can kind of see what the Korean community is talking about. Now, as someone who's not, again, an expert or a major in art style, I guess is the best way to put this, it's hard for me to pinpoint with confidence on this is why, but I think it's I want to say it's how I really do think it kind of comes down to texture and maybe just how certain objects are. What's the best word for this? And see, as soon as I go into this realm, then I'm not, I don't know all the jargon for. I'm struggling here. I'm grasping at straws. But for instance, if we look at like there's a screenshot, and I think it's in the footage too, with those crates that are stacked up. It almost looks a little out of place, right? And I think I know why in terms of choice from a, I guess, theory standpoint. It looks like they meant for it to obviously stand out. They also wanted it to be clean, so you're not like clipping through the edges or whatever. So I think a lot of the decisions seem to be made from a technical standpoint, but they just look a little off. And it's not the term is not that they look cartoony. That's not the problem. If everything looks cartoony, that's fine. To be honest, Overwatch looks it's a cartoony game. I mean, the trailer for it was literally an animated movie, and that's fine if the entire world revolves around that. But they almost, and that's why I want to say I think it comes down to the textures. Okay, I'm gonna take a stab at this analogy, and it's probably a bad one and a wrong one, but it almost felt like certain aspects were cel shaded when others weren't. I'm not saying that they are. That's just the impression I got, and I think that's maybe what some of the Korean community is feeling from their initial impression of the footage. Generally, a lot of the other responses were, which was very surprising to me as well, that, oh, why would I play this if I can just play CSGO? But CSGO is not played that much in Korea, so just keep that in mind. But, there were people who either are hardcore fans of CS or, they at least watch it and know what's going on in that world, saying, well, if I'm going to play this, I might as well play that. Some people are obviously comparing it to Siege, which, by the way, I think that's a much better comparison than comparing it to Overwatch. I think it's a much better comparison with a mixture of Siege and CS than Overwatch. But anyway, people the people who are still playing Apex were literally like, I don't think I could ever stand playing this game because I'm coming from like the speed and just the smooth movement of Apex, which, quite frankly, if you're a big fan of Apex, it's kind of hard to go into any other FPS at this point and enjoy that, because Apex does that really well, because Titanfall 2 did that really well. But I won't gush about that, because I could go on forever about Titanfall. So, again, it's a lot of mixed reactions, and I want to say also the reason a lot of people are saying it looks old is, I get that it's pre-alpha footage, and I get that they wanted to ride the hype a little bit, but I'll be honest, I was a little disappointed with the footage I saw as well. And I'm holding off my entire thought because obviously I haven't played it, and maybe it will feel different. But did I talk about this before on the connection, or maybe it was just on stream? I've talked a lot about games having that oomph, right? Games having a tangible impact, tangible feedback when actions are taken, right? So if you don't like slow-paced FPSs, that's fine. That's just a difference in preference, right? If you're playing, let's use Siege as an example, since I recently finally got into playing the game rather than just watching it. If you're not a fan of like camping a corner and holding an angle, that's okay, right? That game's just not for you. If you're not a fan of tactical, slow memorizing maps and just holding angles and checking one angle and then shifting to the right and checking the other and then back to the left, and you're just there the whole match. And then maybe you don't see anyone because your team just catches everyone else off, but you feel good because you held that angle, and the next time someone really walks around that corner, you're going to bop them in the head. Like, that's a preference thing. But even Rainbow Six, where especially if you get headshots, the time to kill is very short. The TTK is quite short. It's I never felt that it wasn't impactful. Granted, it's not like Call of Duty where you get like the very loud separate hit marker sound and you see all these like hit markers popping up and then the numbers popping up for the confirming the kill and things like that. It's not as loud and, for lack of a better term, obnoxious as it might be in some of those other games. But I never sat there and was like, oh man, that didn't really feel good. There were times, I will admit, in Siege where I wasn't sure if I got the kill until I saw the number pop up for the points. And then, sometimes I'd be a little confused. But otherwise, like, it felt good. Like, I could tell if I shot and hit a guy and I won that fight, like, there was some form of feedback. And quite frankly, I'll be honest, with Siege, I don't know what that combination is. But different FPSs have different ways of doing that, right? So, for instance, Apex, when you knock off the shield of someone, you hear that sound, and that feels good. You hear the crashing of the cracking of the armor, and you're like, his armor is down, and now you want to rush in. Like, all these games have their own design around that. And watching Valorant, I just didn't get any of it, to be honest. On any, not a single kill in that pre-alpha gameplay I felt like hyped about, basically, right? I could see like the tactical aspect of it, and again, the game's still in development, and obviously, it's people who have been developing it that are internally testing it, so it's a very small presentation. I totally get it, but if that impact isn't there, I don't think it. I actually would have to take back what I'm saying these days about seeing the potential of it growing in Korea. And quite frankly, maybe just generally not as much around the world. But I think when I'm seeing the reactions, Korea has now gotten to a point where they are playing a wider variety of games than they used to. Obviously, still, especially in PC cafes and online, in terms of online gaming marketplace, it's very centric around one game, partly because the population is smaller, partly because that kind of hive mind culture is pretty big in Korea. When something becomes the next big thing, the trend, everyone follows it. So League is obviously just popping off on that front for years now, but people have just been more exposed to different games, right? Steam has become a more commonplace platform for single player games and indie games in Korea, and a lot of this is again because of like different changes in business for different platforms and publishers, also streaming becoming a big thing in YouTube, and so people are just exposed to more games as that becomes a piece of content for a lot of people. And I think that's really shifted the view a little bit of what maybe the Korean audience expects. At the end of the day, obviously it has to come out, and if it feels good to play, regardless of what it looked like, that's going to be a different story, right? Maybe it was just really slow because that's just how they've been playing it, because they started memorizing the map so well internally, etc. And maybe at the lower level for the masses, it's going to be this deathmatch, even though that's not the game mode. And, as it goes in a lot of these tactical FPSs, right? The lower ranks, it's really just people wanting to get the kills because otherwise you don't feel the impact. But that there were some people talking about that aspect as well, where tactical shooters generally, unless you're really hardcore about it, you don't feel rewarded unless you're getting kills as well. But then if that game relies solely around holding angles, right, unless you're really committed to the game, you're not going to get that rush as often as you'd like. And then this goes back to the notion of Koreans are generally very impatient. That's going to be hard to retain a player base in. And I hate to always mention Apex as this like sad example, but Apex is a sad example of where they hit all of those things right and then just like couldn't catch the hackers in time. And then another big other thing is the content pipeline was pretty slow for what Koreans wanted from an online game they invest into, which is another point that people are wondering about is that going to be something that Riot is ready to deal with? It seems that, for instance, character design is fairly harder when it comes to quote-unquote hero-based shooters. But, even if it's not that, for instance, so again, like Fortnite has the battle pass, right, all the time, and Apex has a battle pass too. But I would say Fortnite is one of the best examples of content being pushed through on that front in terms of things to do, things to earn, things to show off. They do it very well in a first-person, third-person shooter world, and if something like that isn't available, it's very hard to retain a player base in Korea. Koreans just are fiending for content. People will oftentimes complain about RPGs giving useless daily quests, but they'll still do it because it's something to do, and it's something new. And so, but people have become pickier now about the content they get. In the past, you could literally just tell people that you need to do all these daily quests to get this cool thing, and it was just chores, but people will still do it joyfully. And nowadays, people will do it somewhat reluctantly in Korea. But that's another point someone brought up. They were like, I don't know if this game is going to be a game where that type of content can be expected. But if it's not, regardless of whether the game's good or not, why would someone spend that time playing this when they could be playing like League, right? Or some, a different game that they're invested into. And that brings up a good point. And this doesn't just go to Korea, but we now live in a world where any game that comes out just has to compete with so many other games, not even just in your own genre. Because there's just too many. There's too many games. We live in this weird world where now there's just too many games to play and try and find out and invest into. And if it comes to online games, there's too many games you need to keep up with. I love Destiny's gunplay. I enjoyed Destiny 2's campaign. Despite its problems with loot, I had a lot of fun doing the strikes. And then I stopped playing for a while. And now I just can't go back. There's just too many things to do. There's too many games that require your attention constantly and consistently. And if you don't give the right reason for someone to now shift that time for you, you might have them try your game. But the moment they put it down, they're not coming back because friggin' Sudden Attack is putting out another skin of a celebrity, and they've already put money into that game, so they'd rather go and just pick that up again. So there's a lot of concern around that, and certain communities in Korea are already saying things like, "Oh, this is just going to go down the Runeterra path, the Legends of Runeterra path." Legends of Runeterra seemingly struggling to hold on to its, captivating its audience in Korea at the very least. Can't speak for other regions as much, but a lot of the streamers who played it on release, whether it's just out of release or because they were contracted to do so, not as many really sticking around with it, whether it's as their main piece of content or supplemental content. Right, it's very hard to hear about it these days in Korea. So these are concerns that are coming out from Korea, and some Korean fans even mentioning the fact that I know certain groups in the Western community also talk about this, but they're saying things like, "Oh, well, League of Legends was technically just a copy of another game, and it seems like that's all Riot's doing, but compared to League, their other games don't seem to bring something as new or refreshing." So that's a concern some people have voiced as well. At the end of the day, I really think the biggest thing was maybe compared to the hype, the graphics and look and feel of the gameplay that they saw in the pre-alpha footage was not as satisfactory, which I will be honest, I kind of agree with. I'm personally a big fan of slower FPSs, so I'm all for that tactical kind of I don't mind holding an angle and not seeing anyone in the winning round personally, but the gun sounds and something about that pre-alpha footage. Again, yeah, I get it, it's pre-alpha, but something about it didn't feel like it gave me a rush. And I think that's something that a lot of the Korean community is concerned about. If the rush is there in a big way, I think they'll overlook the graphics. But if it's not, the graphics are going to become a huge talking point. I can already tell. And regardless of whether it's justified or not, the Korean community, they're already all over the graphics. And in fact, you know what's very funny is the Western audience in general, at least, not everyone, but in general, seem to react very positively about, all the talk of we're going to make sure that this game can be played on really old computers and anyone can join in. And everyone, or, most people have less than 35 ping and all these things. And then Koreans are like, hey, so these are seemingly the system requirements for this game. How can we have faith in this game? Like, that's the reaction I see come up in all these message boards. And I'm like, wow. It's so weird because I would wager that there's still way more people in America like building custom PCs. It has become much more commonplace in Korea than it used to be, right? Even with PC cafes and people still going to PC cafes, gaming PCs are definitely much more common than they used to be in Korea, and there's good services for that, and very cheap options as well. But it was just weird to me to see that standard shift so much than I thought it had in Korea. So we'll have to see. But if the look and feel doesn't hit a home run off the bat, honestly, I think people are just gonna step back onto the whole graphics thing. Regardless of whether it's justified or not, just because that's the first excuse they already found within the Korean community to not get excited about Valorant. So I still think the color palette and art direction is fairly good. After seeing some of the Korean community reactions, I can see why they think it's maybe geared more for other Asian regions and not as much for Korea. I can see where they're coming from. But I still don't think it's like bad for Korea. I think the Korean audience can still get behind it if it feels good. But now there's a big caveat there. So I'm a little wary. Again, I'm also personally kind of wondering if I'll enjoy it. I'll be honest. I want to enjoy it. I want to see it be the next FPS that's played globally, right? Not necessarily beating other games or whatever, but just played globally. Right, there aren't really that many FPSs that you can confidently say are being really played worldwide. So I want it to be that game. I want to be able to enjoy it. I want to be excited about it. I want it to feel good. I want to have fun grinding it. But I'll be honest, I'm a little more wary after seeing that footage. But we'll see. We'll see. Hopefully more people have a chance to try it so we have some more varied opinions rather than a select few, and we'll go from there. And this is a bit of a personal tangent, but I think my wariness also comes from my experience with Legends of Runeterra as well. The excitement I had when it was first announced and during that first invite phase was not there when open beta started. I haven't really touched it after the first 2 weeks, and it's more so again because there's just so many other things to do, so many other games to play that it's just not at the top of my list. If I didn't have other games to play, I would probably enjoy it. But whether it's a matter of time and I need shorter games to play, or whether it's a matter of I just want to have some action in my game or whatnot, the Runeterra is just not at the top of the list for me, and I'm a little afraid that maybe that'll happen with Valorant for me personally, and then maybe a lot of the Korean community as well. If that happens, I mean, so be it. If it's a successful game elsewhere, great for them. Hopefully it continues to retain its player base in other regions, but I think we do have to keep a closer look. I think the criticism currently is unjustified because not enough people have played it. I also think the hype is a little unjustified. I think anticipation is fine, given that, I guess not counting Runeterra, it's like the next big game or the second big game ever that Riot's really investing into. I guess you can't discount Runeterra though, because it's not like a spin-off within League of Legends. So that's TFT. So let's not count TFT. but we'll count. Actually, technically TFT is not either. But anyway, we'll count Runeterra, and then so Project A is the next one. But it's such a far departure. Also, it's not within the Runeterra world. Oh, speaking of that, that I saw a lot of comments about that where Korean communities were like, "Man, I actually think they should have just made it within the Runeterra universe, because then I feel like a lot of us would have just played it just for the sake of it being within the world of League of Legends. But now that it's not, I have no want to try it." It was a similar. There were similar comments like that throughout a number of different threads, which is again something to think about. There were even comments of people being like, "You know what? I'm gonna go ahead and bet that Riot's gonna hype this game up, and then right before release, they're gonna scrap it and be like, all right, we're rebuilding it within the universe of League of Legends," similar to what seemed to have happened with Overwatch during its development phase. So we'll see. I agree that if it was within Runeterra, it would have had an easier start. I also am actually kind of happy to see it leave that universe, but we'll see. Also, it's probably just a lot more difficult to try to shoehorn those abilities and heroes in to a tactical shooter. So I'm assuming that's the biggest reason. But that's where Korea stands. Not that much hype, to be honest. Not too much. There are people excited. Some people have been putting up reasons they think it's going to succeed and reasons they really can't wait to play it, and those exist. But a lot more skepticism than I thought, and on the graphical scale. That's what surprised me the most. So I've been talking about how I hope it's the next FPS that Korea plays alongside the rest of the world, and I still have hopes for that. But I think it's something we need to keep an eye on, and if not, Korea will just continue playing sudden attack. It'll just be the country of sudden attack, as China and Brazil are the countries of Crossfire. More so China. Brazil still has people moving on to CSGO and things like that. Well, that's it for today's news. We talked a lot about Valorant. We talked a lot about the coronavirus, but quite frankly, that's pretty much what's been going on in Korea. There's a number of other small news blips, but Korea is things are a little crazy out here. Again, not because everyone's in danger of being severely ill, but more so because it can affect a lot of people in very negative ways. And if that's the case, and there's no vaccine, right, it's just a matter of containment. So Korea has been taking that quite seriously. Definitely less people out on the streets. Things are emptier. I mean, my neighborhood has a lot of restaurants and a lot of banks and offices. So lunch hours, people are still, eating out, and they're all there. And dinner, I'll still restaurants aren't empty and looking like they're gonna go out of business, but it's definitely quieter. So it's if you have people in Korea, just you don't have to wish them the best because you think you won't necessarily be able to talk to them again, but it just understand that they might be just going through a bit of a tough time of getting stuff done, right? And that can be frustrating. So and also obviously if you do know people maybe who are more susceptible to the virus, then definitely take care around them. Take care of them, and again, just for everyone else's sake, just take better care of yourself, right? If you become a carrier, even if it doesn't hurt you that badly, it complicates things. It makes things worse for people around you. So just take better care of yourself, and then it'll pass. I honestly think it's more a matter of time than anything. But until then, I think it is worth being a little more cautious and taking it a little more seriously. And hopefully leagues can start back up again. I had dinner with a good friend of mine from back in the OGN days last night, and they still work in esports as well across Korea and China, and they were just talking about how they currently don't have work, but they're going to be slammed when things pick up again, and because everything is delayed. Every event is delayed. Every league is starting late or starting in different ways than they were meant to, and that's throwing a lot of things off. So hopefully this is a good learning experience for the esports industry, and hopefully also everyone is, I'm sure they're scrambling, but able to come up with good contingency plans to, whether it's pick things back up just on a delayed schedule, whether it's changing that a little bit, but not at the cost of any one community, right? Whether it's the fans, the players, or themselves. Some, obviously sacrifices will have to be made a little bit, but hopefully it's only up to a point that everyone can still agree it's for the better. So best wishes to all those people that have to work on that and sorting that out. But for now, that's it for the connection, and we will cross this bridge again next week.